start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Trustee Klepp is on the way. He'll be here. I'm going to make a motion that we adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
Thank you. That makes it 2-0 until Tim gets here and fights back. So we'll take that. And we'll start with public comment. Are there any public commenters? Second call, just in case. Any public commenters? Okay.
I think you know what I have to say.
All right, great. So the agenda starts with an overview of funding sources. I think that is kind of baseline setting, and then talking specifically about sinking fund projects, putting together the agenda. I tried to be kind of mutually exclusive wherever we could be with the bond work that committee is meeting tomorrow, of course. So there's some overlap, of course, some common topics, but in terms of what we're actually talking about going forward, I will do my best to be mutually exclusive and not redundant, and where we can be efficient and reduce the number of meetings, we will do that. So I thought it was important for us to start with kind of a baseline conversation, and then we'll be able to tell really what our meeting schedule should be with most of the bond work kind of commanding everybody's time. So just a kind of a heads up on that. And then I will turn it over to Dr. Tuttle and to Moran for the overview.
So I think everybody knows Gary Clint from Clint Moran, and thank you for being here, Gary. He also lives in Grosse Pointe, and he's been instrumental, obviously, in his team with sinking funds and bond stuff. And you're correct, some of this is redundant. It's going to be redundant tomorrow for the bond advisory committee as well, but Gary's here to help answer questions. So. I gotta clean this. Sorry, Gary. So as Trustee Derringer just said, this is our overview for tonight. We'll be talking about funding sources, a lot of the same information that was presented at the closed session to the board last Monday, but we'll be reviewing that. We'll look at planned sinking fund projects, facilities assessment and update, and then very, very briefly about the facilities, grounds, and maintenance demands on the district. Mr. Matteson has some data points for that. So again, I'm just going to talk at you for a moment. I think most of you know this, but just as a reminder, how public schools are funded. In Michigan, it's a combination of state, local, and federal sources. State funding is our primary source, our foundation allowance, our school aid fund. That's what we get our per pupil allowance. Then you have the local funding, which is the property taxes and villages, which we're talking a little bit about today. You have your federal funding, which are your supplemental aids, which have very specific purposes aligned to them. There's other sources. We have foundations, grants, and other things that come locally. So just some key takeaways. Michigan schools are primarily funded by the state through a per pupil formula. I know I'm reading at you, but we have the local property taxes, which we just voted, which is your operating mills at 18 mills, non-homestead tax, helps fund operations. Just so you know, for GP, that equates to about $22 million. The state assumes that you're going to collect that. So if you don't, it's actually a deficit to the district. So we're grateful to our voters. Federal funds supplement state and local funding, mostly for specific programs, as I just indicated. Your federal funds are mostly your Title Fund, Title I, primarily Title II, so forth. And then you have bonds and sinking funds, which is what we're talking about primarily today. So the foundation allowance, just to give you again some context, our foundation allowance, each district receives a set amount per student determined by the state. The minimum foundation allowance for 24-25 is $9,608 per student. Those are your basic foundation districts, of which Grosse Pointe is not. Back in the day, when Governor Engler, and we had a different funding source, as you know, Prop A, Grosse Pointe was at that point considered one of the 20J schools because of the taxable value in Grosse Pointe was so much higher. Districts like Grosse Pointe said, well, it's not really fair to be equitable when we collect so many more taxes. So to give you perspective, Grosse Pointe receives $11,303 per student. Sales tax obviously is a source, income tax, lottery revenue, although they just equal that out. Whatever comes in through the lottery they take out. and put someplace else, so that's really not, people think lottery is great for schools, but use taxes, tobacco taxes, and other fees. I'm going to kind of cruise through this unless you guys want me to stop because you've heard it all. But
Yep, we're good.
the 18 mills, as I just indicated, I'm not going to read all that to you. Homeowners, I do want to point out bullet point 3, homeowners are exempt from the millage under Proposal A. It's applied to businesses, rental properties, and second homes. And as I indicated, that's about $22 million to our district. And then you have your additional local millages, which are your sinking fund, your enhancement millage, which the RESA just passed one for special education primarily, but also for some other things, and then debt millages, which are your bonds. Federal funding, just to break down that, your title funds, special ed grants, IDEA, school lunch and nutrition programs, the COVID-19, of which we're pretty much over that. So those came in and are no longer existent, and then other sources of funding. This slide, again, I don't want to belabor the point, but the difference between a bond, a sinking fund, and an operating millage, I'm going to start with operating millage, use those for any operating costs. So basically, anything to operate the district, you can use that's $22 million to do so. Sinking fund, I've shared with you multiple times. They are a pay-as-you-go, contrary to a bond, which is large-scale capital improvements, but there's also interest rate associated to it. So a sinking fund, you know that the district just passed 3 mills for 10 years. As that money comes in, 1 mill for Grosse Pointe equates to about $3.6 million, so we're at 3 mills, so roughly 11 million. You're going to see that in a later slide. And then as your taxable value increases, which hopefully it will continue to do in Grosse Pointe, hopefully, that sum total will increase as well. And bond, I'm going to talk a little bit more about tomorrow. This is another slide that kind of shows the same thing. I delineated it into the purpose, funding mechanism, the requirement, the debt incurred. I do want to point out, like a sinking fund, there's no debt incurred, versus operating millage, no debt incurred, and then a bond, which we'll be talking about more tomorrow, is repaid over time with interest. Typical uses, again, duration, and so forth. I'm not going to go over all of that unless someone has specific questions in the group. So respectful of your time. So on the agenda, I combined these two, past and planned sinking fund projects and facilities assessment. I just want to show, and this was as of 23-24, prior to the 3 mills passage of the sinking fund. So this is when we were only collecting 1 mill. You can see the difference in how many mills are collected per like districts of Grosse Pointe. And I say that because 1 mill represents something very different. In my previous district, 1 mill equated to about $500,000. In Grosse Pointe, 1 mill equates to, as I indicated, about $3.5 to $3.6 million. So even with that, we're still on the low end of mills for a school district to collect. All right, this slide shows, and I break this down in various different ways, but you've seen this slide, the fiscal year, what was spent for the sinking fund. So you don't have to spend all your sinking fund. If you bring in an $11 million a year, you don't have to expend $11 million. So if you have a project that is $30 million and you want to hold in and save some of that and spend it all once you've collected $30 million, you're welcome to do so. And you're going to see later in the slides what we intend to do with the sinking fund and what projects we hope to accomplish. So over the years, you can see the amount spent. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, depending on the needs at that time. All right, this is the slide we call the 252 document. I'm going to show you what it looks like in paper form. I didn't print a ton of these out. But in paper form, this is the document that was created by Plante Moran in 2022, and it was a complete facilities assessment. And I say 252 because the sum total of all the projects necessary came to $252 million. What has occurred since that time, and Plante Moran and Mr. Matteson and I have been working diligently to say, okay, of that 252, what are escalation costs? Additionally, what has been removed because we've been covering it in the sinking fund, and some things actually come off the list because they've been covered in the bond from 2018 or 2019. So you can, when you look at this, it's all color-coded. This isn't something that we share because it's incredibly complex. It's a living document, but I wanted you to see what that looks like. What I want to show you on this slide is that we still have critical needs from the 252. So although the sinking fund, we took off about $111 million, that's over the 10 years of collecting $11 million, You can see that we still have critical need totals. It's broken down into, if you look at your left-hand column, you have your building envelope, you have your interior renovations, furniture and equipment, and then there's a cost per building associated with all of those. So this is the document, the living, breathing document that when we accomplish a task, we take off, and there's always things being added. And Mr. Matteson has done a nice job in making sure that this is current along with Plant Moran. Is there anything, Ben or Gary, that you want to add to that? Okay. So the critical needs still to be assessed, or still to be addressed on that 252 document is on your right-hand column, and it's $60 million that we're hoping, this is a bond thing that you're going to hear tomorrow, that we're hoping that we can address with the bond, that if the bond passes will generate approximately $120 million. 60 million of that will hopefully go to some of the critical needs to continue to address the critical needs on this document. How did we get to that total of 60 million? So I'm going to back up. So you have 60 million on the right-hand side at the bottom. So the original 2022 facilities assessment was 252 million. That's why we often refer to it as the 252 document. Cost escalation from when it was created till today is about $44 million with inflation and other things coming down the pike. I'm not sure how tariffs are going to affect all of that, but that is a concern to the district as well. Then there's the additional scope that Mr. Matteson and Plant Moran, as our experts, have added to it in operations and maintenance. That's what you see, O&M of 23 million. So the updated 2025 facilities assessment comes to roughly $319 million. Of that, you can see things that have come off of that already, coming down to 197 million left on the list. Of that, those are needs, but the critical needs equate to the $60 million, which are referenced in the slide before, and we'll be talking a lot about that tomorrow. Trustee Derringer, I don't know how much you want me to delve into this, because what the next slides show is building by building, what's been complete, the scope of work that was completed with bond, 2018 bond versus sinking fund. Then you see the sinking fund program for 2024 that we're hoping to complete, and then the bond scope as well. So do you want me to read those or just kind of show in general?
Just focusing on the new, right? So I appreciate being able to, as a continuation of what's already been done, but yeah, if we speak a little bit to the new stuff.
Okay, so let's look at, then if you look over at the 2024 sinking fund program, you can see the areas for barns that are incorporated into the capturing of sinking funds for the next 10 years. In a moment, I'm going to show you what we're hoping to accomplish in the next 3 years, because you really should have a 3-year plan, but again, they're always working documents. So defer, you're going to see technology upgrades. I'm going to go back one. Maybe not. Technology upgrades throughout, safety and security, replace fire alarm systems, roofing replacements, masonry tuck pointing, fire escape replacements. So very necessary safety and security needs for our buildings. Defer, you go to ferry, you see some of the same. I'm just going to let you read those. If you want to focus on the 2024 sinking fund program, I'll give you a minute to read those. Continue, Kirby. Mayor. See a lot of redundancy, roofing. This is a 10-year.
What does building envelope mean?
It's the exterior of the building.
So windows, roofs.
Yeah, okay. And maybe this, be ignored because
No,
you
you're
have
not.
answered this question already. If you're in an environment, if you just advance forward 2 years and just say the bond passes, so you're in an environment where cash has been, the bond, say first tranche of bonds has been sold, so there's cash available, and we've also done our first collections from the sinking fund, so the sinking funds are also available. None of that can be used for operating funds. Is it like how's the judgment made between, again, this project is we're gonna use bond funds to do this versus the sinking fund dollars?
Yep. So when we get the money from municipalities, it's very specific if it's coming from the bond or from the sinking fund. So it goes in there. Then the projects, we really have told what project we're doing for the next 10 years out of the sinking fund.
Yeah.
Now that can change, and I always use the example, I've used it before.
Yeah.
Um,
Flipping the thing upside down. Yeah, it's like the boiler explodes on us.
Correct,
unexpectedly.
yes.
We can make a judgment call as to which.
Correct,
source
so you
of-
might forego a window somewhere
Yeah.
in a particular building.
Okay.
But then the bond language, if the bond passes, the bond language is pretty specific too. I mean, it's general,
Right, right.
but it talks specifically on what you can utilize those for.
And with every year going forward with the 11 million, I believe we left $1 million open every year for
Discretionary.
those contingencies, right?
Correct, yep. The example I was gonna give was if you're,
Oh,
you,
sorry.
no, that's okay. If you saved up for a dishwasher in your house and you're getting ready to pay for it, but then the refrigerator breaks, the refrigerator becomes a priority.
Yeah.
At least in my house, we
Yeah.
are more
Yeah.
interested in the dishwasher.
Same.
And that happens here. I've had situations where you get a sinkhole that you didn't expect. So,
Right.
again, a living and breathing document. Here's Mason. My point in showing you this is that every building has been touched in some capacity by the sinking fund and will be continued to be touched by the sinking fund. And the bond will be the same if it passes. By the way, this will be uploaded to our website, so if community members want to see this, they're welcome to it. I wanted to show it to you first, and then it'll be put on tomorrow by the end of the week. I will be taking off the 252 document just because it's complex, and this is a summary of it. Anyone wants me to slow down, otherwise I'm just going to kind of cruise through. Lots of similarities. They're beautiful historic buildings. Obviously, there's a lot of maintenance to keep up older buildings, but they're also beautiful. Not a lot of districts. Yeah, I thought we had. Okay, so major sinking fund objectives: increase building security, always door access controls, camera surveillance, and access control. Just redundant, sorry. Instructional and student technology refresh. And I do want to say, Dr. Stanley's not here, but if you haven't been any of the previous presentations, technology is, the scope is immense. It's not just computers, it's the clocks that are digital and ensuring that we're all on the same clock schedule. It's the access, the building access when we have our badges. I thought I had my on, but so much falls under the scope of technology, copiers. So some people think, well, technology is just computers. It is a lot of safety and security is built into technology as well.
And it's not just, it's nothing new, it's refreshing and licensing and everything that we would have to otherwise pay for from the general fund. We have to pay for it.
That is absolutely correct. You either pay for it from the general fund or you don't have it. And that's the good and bad thing, but in Michigan, we don't get funds for capital projects like other states do. So communities have to pass sinking funds or bonds to continue to maintain or improve facilities. This is a major slide. I want to make sure that people understand with the sinking fund. Again, you've seen this, but these are the projects that are not included. And I say this because this may be a bond discussion. I don't know, but there is not included our major middle school pool renovations. Now that doesn't mean we're not doing nothing with the pools, as Mr. Matteson and Clint, Moran, and I discussed. If there's bad ceiling tiles or a light bulb needs to be changed, we're going to do those minor things. But if a pool is absolutely, there's a crack in the foundation, we're not going to repair that with sinking fund dollars. So just pools are very expensive. Whomever had the vision for this district was a beautiful vision. We have a lot of pools, a lot of auditoriums. Whomever built that was amazing. I don't think you have a lot of districts that have multiple auditoriums, multiple pools, a planetarium. Grosse Pointe has much more than most districts, but there is a maintenance to all of that as well. And that's why the Parcells pool is no longer usable, and I don't know, but it possibly can be a discussion for bond. I don't know what to do with that space. Classroom furniture is not included. You're going to hear that tomorrow in bond. Classroom furniture is very expensive, but you can see from the pictures we have pretty antiquated furniture in the majority of the district. There are part and parcels that have been improved, but our recommendation is tomorrow for the bond will be to improve all the classroom furniture. District-wide air conditioning, again, in these older buildings, it's really difficult and very, very expensive for district-wide air conditioning. It is not in this current sinking fund, and the IA building at South has not been. So we just wanted to be clear when we put this together, these are things that are not included in the sinking fund.
Was that, unlike the air conditioning point, is that something that would be precluded from sinking fund, or it simply wasn't the priority?
The latter.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And I don't know that we could generate enough funds. Gary, you can talk, but air conditioning these older buildings, and there's lots of air conditioned spaces in each one of the buildings. There's just, we don't have central air in all of our buildings. In these older buildings, it's kind of,
Yeah,
you wanna talk about that?
I mean, I was just thinking about that bullet point, and just really more as a representative of a sort of item that you might pay for with a bond, but then does it incur a burden on the operating fund or the sinking
For
fund
sure.
going forward for maintenance?
Yep, for sure.
Yeah.
Didn't we estimate air conditioning for the whole district would cost about 12 million?
Somewhere in there, yeah. I'd have to look at the last airsman assessment, but I think you're in the ballpark.
That would be 12 million for the hardware and install initial cost.
For the whole district.
Right, there's certain challenges when it comes to some of the historic buildings. Like if you look at that picture up there, some of the only ways we can air condition rooms is put mini splits. So you don't want mini splits put around your historic buildings. Unit vents, you're going to have to cut into the exterior. So there's challenges when it comes to that we have to navigate when we go through that process of assessing what gets air conditioning and what doesn't if it comes to that point.
Do we have any concept of what kind of what the ratio is already air conditioned?
I don't have that on me. I can get it.
And the reason I ask, just to be fully transparent, is because then the ongoing cost, like what Tim said, is there's going to be an increase in electricity use if that were to be done.
Electrical bills go up.
Yeah.
So how much, estimating how much of that you're signing up for would all be part of the study. Okay.
All right, so this is just how we get to the total 10 years. And then we've gone through, in a minute I'm going to show you the next 3 years. But roofing, again, this is without inflation, without escalation. If we had to put a cost to it today, all of us know that these are going to go up. But roofing district-wide equates to roughly 13 million. Masonry restoration, and I'm not going to read all these to you, but chillers, elevators, site work, architectural, transportation, infrastructure, and so forth. So this is how Mr. Matteson, Plante Moran, our experts, our facilities and finance committee worked extensively on this last year to come up with this. So we do have a plan, but the plan is fluid always for numerous reasons. So future sinking fund projects, 24-25, we began with an estimated beginning fund balance of 1.7 million. You see the 3.5, this was our last collection. We're a December tax levy, so our last collection for the previous sinking fund was this December. It generated 3.5 million. The district-wide scope, based on that sum total, you can see everything that we're hoping to accomplish this summer equates to $4,568,131, which leaves us with a projected fund balance of $686,803. Then you go to the next slide. You see the fund balance from the previous slide at 686. Now the revenue is 11 million because now we're on the new sinking fund, which equates to the 3 mills. You can see all the things that we're hoping to accomplish in the summer of 2026, the total of that, and then the remaining fund of that would be $404,493. And that starts beginning balance for 26-27. Again, this is something that the previous facilities and finance team put together with the experts of Plante Moran and Mr. Matteson's expertise on the district prioritizing the needs. So
So we estimated 1 mil approximately 3.5 million in revenue, right? And then up
Say
to
that again? Yes,
1 mil,
yes,
$3.5
correct,
million
yes.
dollars, right? And then up to 3 mils makes it 11?
Roughly 11. It's more like, it'll probably be more like 3.6, 3.7 with the taxable value increase.
Okay, so there's a taxable value increase assumption in there as well, right? So it's not 10.5 rounding up. It's
Correct. Yep. And again, the formula, you take your value of your house,
Mhm.
divide it roughly by 2. If you could sell it for $500,000, you divide it by 2, $250,000. Sinking funds is $1 and every $1,000 of taxable value. So 1 mil is $250. Multiply that by 3, you have $750 a homeowner would purchase if they could sell their, or would expend if they could sell their house at $500,000. I had several of those examples previously, but that's how the formula works. So again, this is kind of the same slide. I think I already showed you this actually, but I do want to show you the additional scope. I wanted Mr. Matteson to just kind of talk about that 23 million additional scope from the original 252, because it's not like you're just trying to knock down 252. Things have a lifespan to them. Roofs don't just last forever. I hear that a lot. Didn't we just replace that roof? And the older we get, that time frame gets shorter and shorter. And we're like, well, that was 15 years ago. And we think it was yesterday. So parking lots have to be replaced constantly. Boilers, everything has a lifespan to it. So do you want to speak at all to that additional, like some of the things that you included that wasn't on the original?
Sure, and like you said, the parking lots, the roofs, they all have a life expectancy. We have issues right here at North that there's a sense of urgency on to get that roof replaced sooner rather than later. So we have an aging facilities in our school district, and a lot of the scope that was added was, like Dr. Tuttle said, was the roofs, the parking lots, there's some electrical boilers and HVAC. So that was some of that scope added of the 23 million.
Right, and it's a living document. You really, as you take one thing off, it seems like 3 things get added that cost more.
What's the lifespan for the parking lot?
So I estimate between 15 to 20 years, depending on the lot.
So this I just wanted to bring, you saw this in part, are you able to open that, Dr. Bishop, that link? I don't know if I can do it. But so we're constantly looking at this, but I wanted to look specifically under the expenditures at the line item operations and maintenance. And I think I have I don't know if I can point, but you can see, can you show the 11,793,000? That's the current budget. Yep. So this is what's currently budgeted in our operation and maintenance. Our budget is roughly $100 million. So that's over 10% of our budget. But it includes keeping our buildings clean and pristine, but it also includes a lot of commitments we've made to community to utilize our facilities, which we really appreciate the relationship between the community and the district. But those demands continue to increase, so I asked Mr. Matteson to just kind of give you an idea of how many additional activities we've added just in the last couple of years that our maintenance staff, our buildings and ground staff have to prep, whether it's plowing for a theater production or grooming a field. It gets costly. So you want to share a little bit about that?
I think I'm going to throw a question out there just nobody gets a prize for this, but does anybody want to guess how many events for this school year that the plant staff has serviced?
For school-related activities
All
or
district-wide,
District-wide?
both, all included.
And community, district and community.
Plus
Yep.
community?
Yep. And that's up to date, so we're talking September 1st to the day.
You're counting every home game or something?
We have a gift for whoever can get close.
I would estimate it's around 500 events.
Already this year?
From district-wide.
250.
Oh, way more than that.
So the district plant staff has serviced 7,500 events from September 1st
So, okay.
to date.
I was only counting from Monday.
So that's 848 Saturdays and Sundays, 203 Sundays. That's just from September 1st to today. Going to the calendar year, I kind of pulled some data because I know some of you like data. So back in 2023 for the calendar year, the district maintenance department serviced 10,863 events. In 2024, it was 11,812 events. So there was a 1,000 event increase between 23 and 24. So my staff enjoys the community, and it's important in sharing the load there. But since I've been with the district, which is 3 years, there's been I don't want to call it pressure, but to be good stewards with our budget, and pushing back on overtime, pushing back on staff, things like that. And the trajectory is we're increasing the events district-wide, but we're trying to reduce overtime and be good stewards with what we've got. So it's taxing, and when I gave that data, that includes neighborhood club, East Side Soccer, our internal events, our practices, everything all inclusive. But it's taxing at times for me to manage that. We're proud of what we've accomplished, but it's taxing on my budget, it's taxing on my staff. We're creeping into Labor Day weekends, and it's just becoming a lot. There's an appetite out there for the community, and we're happy to service the community and our students. I'm not whining about that, but there is a breaking point.
Yeah, if there's a breaking point with human resource, there's also a breaking point financially. You want to minimally break even, and we're not breaking even right now. So what that does is it's great that we're able to do it, and a lot of those community events service our students, which is our responsibility to do so, but it does take money out of classrooms if we're doing so many extracurricular activities and paying this kind of money. And you can see from the all the way over to the right-hand column, the prior actual, you can see that actually Mr. Matteson's budget was reduced last year because we had to make significant budget cuts. And I think, I don't want to speak for you, but a lot of that cut came from some landscaping, and so it's hard to keep things clean and pristine, and you have to put priorities to it as well. So I just kind of wanted to share that it's obviously a facilities thing, but it's also a budgetary thing. They kind of mix.
Well, I guess my reaction, like, as part of, we're going to be heading into the budget cycle, and what would be good to know ultimately out of that line is if you're able to delineate and quantify, okay, forget the student events, but for the community events, here's the commitment that we're making to the community. Is it 500,000 of that? Is it $1.5 million of half of that? Like, this is the extra cost, and maybe we want to bear that burden, but at least quantify it so we can, we talked about trade-offs in the budget parameters. What are the trade-offs that we could think about?
Yeah. And we have a lot of passions. Obviously, everybody's passionate, but you can't do everything. So, and a big, again, I don't want to speak for Mr. Matteson, but a big component of that is how hard your winter is too. Your plowing, your salt, your overtime. That can take a big chunk of a budget if you have a really harsh winter. And I think, comparatively speaking, this was harder than most.
Since I've been here, yes, we generate a lot of overtime for snow removal, and it's not necessarily the salt. We used 50 tons more of salt this winter, but that's not where you're seeing. It's an increase, but the labor that's involved to move all that salt, move all that snow, is where you're seeing the cost.
And the wear and tear on vehicles and
100%.
Gas prices, and it's all inclusive. So that all falls on this budget. So, all right. Any other questions on that? Thank you. This is just a continuation of that same slide.
So I guess, are we looking into how to
balance that?
Well, so yes. What happens, and I'm not going to call anyone out, but we signed a contract for a sum total of $15,000. Really, in my opinion, it should be based on how many events. Because I'm just going to use community organization A says we'll pay you $15,000, but we want free reign, and they end up using so many and costing the district $30,000. Now we're down $15,000, where it should be based on a per use. You're going to use the baseball field, it costs X. You're going to, for 6 events, you're going to use. And what happens is people have become used to just being able to use events. And I tell you this because if you really want to be fiscally responsible, there's going to be people that are unhappy when we say, well, you need to charge you more, or you can't utilize them as much, or if we're going to get rid of overtime, you don't have, I'm not suggesting this, if the camera's around, but maybe you don't have events on Sundays, or you don't have events on Saturdays. I mean, there are ways that you can curtail that, but we haven't, I don't have a recommendation for that, but it's going to have to be considered. It's a huge amount.
I think I agree with Tim, is that you look at it, once it's quantified, eyes wide open, we got the sinking fund. We may get the bond and say, okay, we're okay with this amount. Or we're not okay with this amount, but it's just once we have that data.
I think we need the data, and then we need to look at contracts.
Do we have some concept of how many contracts we would be looking at that kind of go into that?
Communities that have
those
really
types of
don't.
relationships where they sign.
I mean, like Red Barons, we're working on a contract with them.
Little Leagues would like a contract, Neighborhood Club has a contract, Grosse Pointe Theater has a contract. Those are the ones off the top of my head.
So just as like a scale of magnitude, are we talking 20 contracts? Are we talking 100 contracts? Are we talking 1,000 contracts?
I just know the ones off the top of my head. I could delve into that deeper. And another one is just looking at our class ones. So I don't want to get into the detail of how we justify, but class ones in the district are organizations that do not get charged in the district. So there's class 1, class 2, class 3, and class 4. Class 4 would be just your average outside organization without 503(1)(c). So looking at that list, that's pages and pages of organizations in the district that needs to be scrubbed a little bit.
And class 1 is
Class
a school district, like one of our sports teams. We're not charging them.
Correct. But those lists can and should be scrubbed because there could be opportunity for clubs to sneak in there. I don't manage that document, so but
Is that by building principal?
it's managed by the finance team manages it. So we've had a lot of turnover there, so we just have to go through and scrub that.
That's all I have.
Okay. A couple questions that I jotted down. I think most of them are pretty short answers, probably cut and dry. When we say critical needs, right? Can we define critical? Is there is that cut and dry, or is it just potential failure on some?
It's more or less stuff that is going to be impactful to students. Safety items, things like that, electrical, plumbing, things that would really impact students being able to go into a classroom and learn.
Abatement waste part of that as well.
Environmental abatement work. So things like furniture, we would move that off to deferred because they can still learn in the desks that are there. It's not a safety issue.
So those classifications that are critical, deferred, are there other definitions?
Yeah, here, he can, does it still have all that? Can I see that?
Yeah, so it's typically critical needs, deferred maintenance, and then property enhancement. Property enhancement is things like window treatments or things like that. The current ones are fine. It's not going to impact a student's ability to learn, but it'd be nice to have. Deferred is something that we know is coming down the pipeline. Like an example would be like a boiler replacement. Right now it's fine, but 5 years from now or 10 years from now, it's probably going to need to be replaced.
Okay. Any other follow-up comments? Okay. Deciding kind of the fluidity between we're covering with the sinking fund and with the bond. Can you just talk a little bit about the process of identifying that? Was it the sinking fund plan, because that's what we educated the community on, so that's kind of solidified, and then everything else is about identifying what's missing from that?
Yep, I think that's exactly right. And obviously, we don't know if the bond's going to pass. So
Right.
we took the most critical of the critical needs, if we could have had another column, and that became what we're going to use for the sinking fund. And then there obviously were several other critical needs on that list.
Right.
That the bond committee will look at those tomorrow. We have a recommendation for about 60 million of it, and then the bond committee will look at the other 60 million. How they would choose to prioritize the use of that revenue if we have it.
So then those are the types of things, the 60 that would potentially be in the bond, those are going towards the rest of our critical needs, and we think that we've pretty much handled that list in theory, right, outside of how it evolves over time, right?
Well,
But just on paper today, we would say those boxes are checked if we had that additional 60.
I'm going to jump in. You guys we could have put more on that, but we wanted to. So when you do projects like this, there are things, I call them the tunnel projects, that nobody sees that you have to do, but the community wants to see some projects too. So it's a balance of, I want to see the parking lots, the playgrounds, whatever. So we try to balance that. So we wanted to get to a goal of 60 million of the critical needs that we would recommend knocking off and giving the community, the bond advisory committee, the additional 60 to prioritize. So when you ask, are we completely done with the critical needs?
Right.
No, but some
Never.
of them, right, and they continue to creep up, but.
Makes sense. So that answered it was just the contingency if the bond doesn't pass. Of course, then I think it's obviously very wise that we've stayed with the sinking fund. This is known funding, a little bit of fluctuation up and
Yeah.
down, but those projects are planned.
And to Trustee Catton's point earlier, we did include $1 million of contingency in each of the 10 years if something were to occur that wasn't
Right.
initially identified.
The updated facilities assessment then is really an exercise in taking that original document and then moving based on what has been done and what has evolved.
Yep,
since
so it was
then.
all color coded, like what was moved because of sinking fund, what's been moved because of bond, what we want to put on for the current critical needs. So yes, that's what, and it's a living, breathing document. So we add, we delete, but we never officially delete, we just highlight.
Right.
So that we can see what's been done over time. So it's a
Reclassify.
historical living document.
Okay, and then do we have access to that, view access or anything?
You do, but
But we're gonna take it off the public
correct.
part
Yeah,
of the
just
bond
because it's
package.
incredibly complex and then people get into, ask specific questions and it's a forest document, not a tree document, so to speak, so. And it would involve a lot of expertise to answer a lot of questions and a lot of time to do so. And we trust our experts.
Okay, the schedule of projects that is coming up for this year in mostly the summertime, I'm guessing the plan based on the high level there. Have all of those already gone out for bid and all of that is lined up and away we go? Can you give us just a quick kind of an annual overview of like the seasons, right? So if we have a summer implementation, then work us back to when we have to start on next summer's sinking fund projects.
Gary and I are already knee deep into that. It takes a lot of planning, and we're already starting to work on the chiller project for 2026, roofing assessments and things like that. So there's some projects that don't take very long, like the sinking fund, the 2025 bleacher project did not take that long. It took me probably 6 months to get the whole project planned out and out for bid and back and approved by the board. It just depends on the project, on the genesis of it and how long it takes and lead times, and there's a lot of factors involved on each project.
And fair to say that we want to get those bids out as soon as possible because in the school business, the summers are, so contractors can't work all year. They typically do things in the summer. So you want to get as many bids as possible. The longer you wait to put an RFP out, the fewer bids you receive.
a good example is the paving projects we just did. We had a great bid window with that. We started design early, got them out on the streets, and even the contractors in the post-bid interviews were saying, you guys had a great window. We got amazing pricing. We're well under budget. So typically start design early on. We've already started for 2026 with north, south, and I think Barnes is the third one. So we're already off to the races. That typically will end in August, September. We'll do final review of documents, then put it on the streets. That takes about a month to get bids back, and then we'll take it to the board finance facilities meeting. So we're well off and on our way for next year.
So then it seems like probably the next major milestone for review and details is for the sinking fund spending for next school year, and that probably comes sometime this fall. Correct. Right? So, and I'm just trying to eyeball when we need to convene and talk about these details.
I was always told, in my experience, that really February is the latest you could get an RFP out if you want to do something in the summer, and that's the latest, and that's pushing it. You're not going to get competitive bids and so forth. So, and then you also look at things. Steel prices fluctuate. Is that really what we want to bid? If steel prices are up more, you might change something. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
So you look at costs.
Depending on the project, you might take some, if you're doing like an interior renovation, you might take out the mechanical HVAC portion and then bid that out early because it's a longer lead time. So there's different ways you can approach it, but yeah, the earlier the better for the most part.
And that's why we have a 3-year, again, fluid document. But every year you should review what's going to happen on that 3rd year. And always have a 3-year rolling plan.
Board, okay. Again, that is mostly for us internally here to figure out exactly how often or not often we need to convene and talk about the things. Again, I said in our first meeting, if we need to meet quickly and something comes up that's urgent, of course we can get together, but I don't want to schedule meetings just to schedule meetings and say the same thing. So I appreciate how busy everybody is, right now especially, but I thought it was important while all the information is fresh, let's level set and create a plan for the committee as well on top of all the rest of the conversations. So those are my comments. And then the agenda, we can move on to other committee member comments. We'll just go this way around here.
I don't have anything, but I appreciate the kind of that sort of mental model of how we're going to approach this. It's good.
Agreed. Ben, anything to add?
Nope, I'm good. No comment.
Ben's got a lot on his plate, so I just want to give a shout out to Ben, especially if this bond passes. That's a lot of money that he's overseeing projects for, so it's probably something we're going to need to consider.
I'm very thankful to the community for voting that sinking fund. It'll be a huge help to me personally, so and our students.
So, and duly noted, Ben deserves a lot of credit and additional praise and credit when possible. I think it's important to say that publicly as often as we can as well, not just the committee, but on the stage. So second that as well. Good. Okay, and we adjourn the meeting.
Second?
3-0.
Hey.
You guys have a great night. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're going to work on the policy.